Okay, so let's have a conversation about loops and samples and how they get such a bad rap in music production by everyone. I honestly think that this hate is pretty unfounded considering the fact that we also have collaborations in which we approach a musician to play a guitar part in our song, or we approach an organist to play the organ in our song because we personally cannot play those instruments ourselves. The only difference here is there's no personal interaction. So why is it considered such a bad thing to use a loop or a sample when you're producing? Now, the whole reason I bring this up is because this episode of the workshop, I'm talking about my latest song, Torrey Pines.
Stay keeping it wavy like in Torrey Pines.
Which, by the way, if you have not heard yet, I'll leave a link down in the description and the music video linked up somewhere. But in this song, I wanted to break down the music production side of things because this is something that I haven't done in a while, but also I wanted to talk about two different loop tools that I used that helped me build out the beat of this song. One was LANDR Chromatic, and the other was Arcade by Output. And even if we go back to my last single before this one, Stay featured a loop engine as well, which was called Auto-Tune Splice. In short, there are so many different tools at our disposal to help us make the music that we want to make if we don't necessarily know how to use those types of instruments or vocoders or whatever it may be. All right, so enough talk. Let's get into the beat itself. Now, first and foremost, the start of this song, if you guys saw the original posting of this video, it started with this loop from Unison, which is... So, you know, something really chill that as soon as I heard it, I immediately got an idea for a vocal. It didn't take too long at all. And this is one reason, or I should say reason number one, why I have nothing against loops, nothing against samples, and using that in your workflow when you're making music.
Come all if you're with me, talk and let's get high.
It can inspire ideas that you previously weren't thinking of because you were so caught up in your usual thought process when it comes to the music you make, the usual chords that you do, the usual style that you play them in, or the tempos that you choose, the way that it's processed as well, and the way that it was all put together for me in this package. I immediately got the idea for the intro of this song, which was like, you know, we're wavy, you know, stay keeping it wavy down in Torrey Pines. And that was literally just the intro of the song. Now, I always talk about progressing your song and taking it to the next step, you know, to keep your listener engaged and as if there is growth happening, because we want to reach that climax and then have that story be told to us and come back down. So the next step for me was to add some drums to this loop. And in this case, I just decided to choose something very quick that would get some fast drums for me, which was LANDR's Chromatic. So with the drums of this song, I knew exactly what set in LANDR I wanted to use because I've used this plugin before on different tracks and different things I've tried. This particular set though, I loved, but I didn't find a song that I could put it on yet. And so I knew that this was gonna be the case because it has like this kind of tribal feel to it. And that to me has been the vibe of a lot of the songs that I've been trying to come out with, or not trying to, but it's just been happening that way. The tribal feel of glow.
CD boy copping the condo, millions from a bando. And just like the sun, I shine on the glow, get energy. And if you feeling right, then put your hands in the air. You already know that we gonna glow.
It had like that really tribal feel, that African drum that I sampled in there, which was another loop that if I didn't loop that and sample it myself, which where am I gonna get access to, you know, like some authentic, you know, tribe with drums and bongos, and I'm live there. So I sampled it on my phone and I just looped it in my program. This is the same thing, but somebody else has done the sampling for me. And so because that feel has been what I've been trying to produce in my music, or what I've been feeling to produce, I thought it went kind of good with the Unison loop here. Another thing I like to do with these looping plugins, loop engines, whatever you want to call them, is if some of them start with a kick or they start with a snare, like in this case right here, obviously it can play an entire loop by itself. Like in the context. But sometimes when you have enough space to just play it as a regular one shot, that's the thing I do as well. So in this case, I was just going, making my own patterns. That, you know, it's a very simple tip to teach, but it's something that you should, you know, think about yourself. Even some of these other like more complicated ones. Like, you just, I don't know, random stuff. You gotta feel it though. At the end of this is a little transition. It's a piano that comes in and it lends into the verse, which is where we're gonna get into the singing part of the song. So here is where I decided to use Arcade instead of LANDR Chromatic. I am a person who's big on having multiple tools that may do the same thing, but they do it in either a different way, a different type of workflow for the user, a different user interface even, because that to me is kind of inspiring, seeing a visual on the screen, different sounds that come from these things. So having both LANDR Chromatic and Output Arcade, there's nothing wrong with that because they offer two totally different libraries of sound and feature sets and ways to get those sounds. So that's when I threw in this Arcade here, and I wanted to find some kind of like relaxing, kind of smooth sounds that went with this smooth intro that we have, this wavy intro. Now, before the beat comes back in though, usually people would hear something like this and think it would be more suited for an R&B song. So I'll show you an example of like some programming that would go better, I guess, with this. Right? Seems natural. I just had to zone out for a second. But you see how easily I could have gone that route with this song, and I could have built out something that was traditionally R&B. I feel like if I went this route, I would have wrote a totally different song and not the one that I actually wrote, because this seems more sexy, you know? But I wanted to go for something that was playful and melodramatic, I guess. So instead of using like another loop or something from Arcade, or even programming my own drums that sounded traditional R&B, I stuck with the drums that I used in the intro. So this kind of like, and I kept it with that same kind of, so that's why instead of that traditional R&B sound, I got something like this. Immediately more tribal. Instead of like sexy, you know? This is more like, oh, it's serious. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so just like Arcade, LANDR has this, you know, feature where you can control the loops that you get and get different outputs, you know, different output, where you can get different results using the black keys on top. So it'll actually tell you at the top, there's 5 different things that you can adjust. So the first thing we have is our filter. Arcade, usually it changes depending on what lines you use. The filters will change or the macros will change. So you might not always get, you know, filter, lo-fi, reverb, delay, and then, you know, this thing over here. With LANDR's Chromatic, it stays the same up here, but these effects allow you to get a ton of different types of sounds anyway, especially like this lo-fi one. It's such a wide range of sound you can get. So it just, yeah, it depends on the things that you have, the sets that you have. They all have like a key adjustment thing so they can all play in the key. So when it comes to comparing these things, they essentially do the exact same thing. They have the same functions. It's just done in a different way, or there might be a different set of varying tools that change in each set or each line, whichever it's called in, you know, the respective plugin. But either way, they still get great results, and that's why I use both of them. Like, obviously, one of them I was given because, you know, it was a sponsorship and I was doing a review. The other one, Arcade, I've been paying for myself since before sponsors would even reach out to me. And honestly, I did pay for LANDR through LANDR Studio. So technically, I did pay for both. And the same goes for any other tool. I would say they're very useful to have in your arsenal just to be able to change up the workflow like I did. So now my song has its main melody, which is the piano, and its main drum. I obviously have to add something to this, but I don't want to be that person that just only uses samples and only uses loops in their song. There's nothing wrong with this, but me personally, I always think it should be part of the creative process for you to add something that came straight from you, whether it's just one note that you're going up and down or one drum that you're pressing. You should add something to the samples that you use. Don't just use the samples, don't just use the loops and just have them do the work for you. This is where, you know, the subjectivity of like samples and loops become, oh, you shouldn't use it, and it kills your originality, it kills your creativity, blah, blah, blah. All these people, all these purists, this is where they come from. And I used to be there to a lesser extent because obviously I would sample a lot, but then I would still play my stuff with these samples. I have since changed to where I don't care how people make the music that they want to make, as long as they're happy with the music that they create. But I do want to push out there and say and recommend every person who wants to consider being a professional music maker, producer, or even do it just as a hobby, but one that you get better at over time. When you use loops, when you use samples, because there's nothing wrong with that, put in some kind of personal aspect to either the drums or the music, no matter how small or how big it is, because over time it can become bigger and bigger and bigger, and sooner or later you end up producing entire songs by yourself because you've incrementally got yourself into production. That's how I did it. Now, granted, I taught myself how to play the keys and I play the organ at my church every single Sunday. But I say that to say I'm a professional organist, I'm a professional musician, and even I find so much value in using loops and samples in my workflow because it can bring out something in me that I couldn't bring out myself before. That's why I use them. That's why I recommend everybody use them. But also in that, I'm able to play my own stuff on top of that, which makes it more easy for me. But when I first started my production, and I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, when I first started my production and I was only sampling, I used to click in my notes before I knew how to play the crazy chords and do progressions and things like that. I used to click it in. Anything that's gonna add to it, just trust me on this. It might not seem like much as you're doing it. It might not seem like you're really benefiting yourself in continuing to use loops, but every now and then you'll add like a shaker or you'll add a piano that you play something. But trust me, over the course of 5-10 years, and I know that sounds like a long time, I know, but trust me, you'll see such an evident growth. And it all came from loops. I am a living example, but also I practice playing the piano every day too, so. So if you wanna see how the full beat itself was made, you can actually check out this video here, the Unison Mangler video, where I produced this song in its entirety. It was a relatively easy song to make because I used so many loops and so many samples. I'm encouraging every single producer out there, every music maker out there, every person who hasn't gotten into producing because they're afraid that if they use a loop, they're gonna be called a fake producer. Who cares what they have to say? Because they're not paying your bills, they're not writing your checks, they're not living your life, they're not wearing your shoes, they're not wearing your clothes, they're not wearing your underwear, they're not taking your poops, okay? They're not you. You are you, and you're supposed to enjoy the life you're living and the things that you're creating and what you're coming out with. And so, with that said, get both. Get LANDR Chromatic, get Output Arcade. It's all how you approach it. Loops are not the devil. Samples are not the devil. You are for demonizing people into believing that it is. Thank you. Stay legendary. I love you. Check out my music. Bye.